Sujay says, is a war between India and China inevitable within this decade? Binge watch and learn about geopolitics on Ask Abhijit Clips. Subscribe now. Interesting question. Is a war between India and China inevitable? Let's say the Chinese push India into a war. See, India is not a warmongering country. India just wants peace and tranquility on the northern border with Tibet. India has no ambitions to invade Tibet and grab Tibet and annex Tibet. India has never wanted to do that. In the past 10,000 years of Indian history, we have never done that. Well, more or less. All right. So we have never done that, and we have no ambitions of making Tibet part of India. So the Chinese know. The Chinese know that they don't face any threat from India in the Himalayas. Tibet is a region that doesn't face any threat from India. There is no imminent danger of an Indian invasion and takeover of Tibet. The Chinese know that. And yet the entire border, map, we must have the map. We cannot talk without maps because maps are very important. Where is the map? Right, let's take a look at the border. This is the map, and the India-Tibet border is essentially a very, very, very long border that stretches from Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir, Gilgit-Baltistan, the Afghan border, all the way to Arunachal Pradesh and the Burmese border, the McMahon line. So the Chinese know that India is not a nation that is threatening an invasion of Tibet. India has never done that. While India had the chance if it wanted in the 1950s, India did not ever bother to do that. So India is not going to do that. And yet the border is highly militarized. It is because of the Chinese threat to India that the border is militarized, not because of the Indian threat to China. The Chinese know. They know very well that India doesn't pose a threat. Now the question is a war inevitable? It is going to a war is going to happen only if the Chinese make the move. Only if the Chinese trigger off, their actions trigger a war, or they cross a certain red line that India cannot, help but retaliate to. Only in that case will a war happen. So the question really is that does China want to go to war with India within this decade? So let's understand the logic. Is China in a position where it can afford to go to war with India? What does it stand to gain? What does it stand to lose? It may stand to gain a little bit of territory. If they think they can win some territory from India, they may want to cut off the Siliguri corridor, which, this little piece of geography over here. They may want to possibly take some part of Arunachal Pradesh, or maybe the entirety of Arunachal Pradesh, especially Tawang, which they have been coveting for a long time. They may want to do some more mischief in maybe Ladakh or whatever. So they may, stand, if they think they can win a war, then they may stand to make some more territorial gains from their perspective, from their point of view, from their thinking. That's what they could gain from a war. But then what will happen? That will push India entirely into the American embrace. And America will be very happy with that. So right now India is following a really genuinely independent foreign policy. India is not overtly in the US camp. The only reason why India is part of the Quad and all that is because of the Chinese threat. And that is entirely up to China, whether they want to keep this happening or not. So if China goes to war with India, they are guaranteed to push India 100% into the American camp. And that is going to be advantage US. And the US is the only superpower in the world, way more powerful than China. The Chinese are, they are not even able to take back Taiwan. They are not able to break free of the first or the second or the third island chain. The Americans are the major power in the Asia-Pacific region, not China, despite whatever you may believe. The Chinese are, it would be extremely counterproductive for the Chinese to go to war, to make a bigger enemy of India than what they've already done. Right now, India is trying to pursue a balanced and entirely independent foreign policy. That is something that's in China's interest. And the thing is that the Chinese rise is no longer happening, the so-called peaceful rise of China. Until 2019, that's what was happening. The Chinese were on track to replace and displace the US as the world's biggest economy by 2035, 2040 or thereabouts. Definitely by 2050, that was the big ambition, the big aim of China. That's no longer going to happen. The Chinese economy is not projected to surpass the US or equal the US economy until 2067, if ever at all. Most likely it will never happen. The Chinese economy and the GDP is contracting. Most nations don't trust China anymore. The Belt and Road Initiative is dead in the water. The Maritime Silk Road is not happening. No real progress anymore. These were the great vehicles that were supposed to make China a superpower. It's not happening. And there's an impending demographic disaster in China. The population collapse is coming. It's already happening now. The total fertility rate is less than 1.2, which is a genuine catastrophe for any nation. And the population is projected to become half of what it is by 2100. And most of the population by that time will be elderly. That's a disaster. Is a nation that faces this sort of prospect in any kind of position to make a huge enemy of India, which for India, the demographic window is going to be open until 2040, 2050. So India has a demographic dividend. China is staring at a demographic disaster. China's economy is contracting. India's economy is rising. China is, from if they think logically and rationally and calmly and unemotionally like the Chinese do, they will realize they are in no position to make a bigger enemy of India than what they have already done over the past 60, 70 years. So I think that it is now unlikely that the Chinese will want to go to war with India this decade. And by the time this decade is out, India is going to be a much larger economy, the way things are going. So in the 2030s, it will be even less likely that the Chinese would want to tangle with India in any sense whatsoever. And the Chinese are already making the noises, the right noises. The new Chinese foreign minister was in India this past week. He met with Dr. Jaishankar, and the Chinese, the statements they made were that they want a normalization of the border situation, and whatever, making the border situation less tense and bringing the things back to normalcy. And it appears that things may be afoot on the ground as well in the direction. The Chinese are trying to de-escalate now. That's what they want. They understand the long-term prospects that they are facing, and they understand the kind of growth India will most likely have. And the Chinese are in no position to actually defeat India in a Himalayan war. In an extremely challenging terrain like the Himalayas, especially with the climate, the Chinese have significant disadvantages. They may try, if they do try to fight a war with India, it may be extraordinarily counterproductive for them. They may actually lose the war and lose face very bad. India could take out lots of their bases in Tibet. The bases in Tibet are naked to the open eye. They are very well, they're properly visible from satellite images and everything, and they cannot be hidden. On the other hand, in India, we can hide things because we have an enormous forest cover in Arunachal, in northern India, etc. And when it comes to extremely high altitude warfare, technology takes a back seat, and the quality of your soldiers takes a front seat. And there also, India has a significant advantage. So the Chinese are not in a position to win a Himalayan war with India. This time, the Indian army is waiting for the Chinese to make a move. If they cross a line, they're going to be taught a lesson they will never ever forget. And in China, in the Chinese Communist Party, failure is never tolerated. If Xi Jinping tries to fight the war with India and suffers a setback, it's going to be the end of his political career, maybe his life. So I think 2 years ago, I would have told you something else, because at that time, the Chinese economy was booming. But in the past 2.5, 3 years, everything has made a 180-degree turn, a U-turn. And now things are very different for China. So I don't think China is in any position to tangle with India and start a war with India this decade or in the next 2 decades, or maybe not this century now. That's what I think. So I think a war between India and China is not inevitable this decade. I think it is it's becoming more and more unlikely now. That's how rapidly the global geopolitical scenario has changed and turned around. 2 years ago, it was totally different. Now it's totally different. So I think it's advantage India. India has to focus on the economy, economic growth, development, reforms, infrastructure, and the military growth. If India does this, I think nobody except the US can stop India then.